Now let me take a moment to introduce our speaker today. Kirsten Engel is a mom, a law professor, and a Democratic state legislator. She is running for U.S. Congress in Tucson's Congressional District 6. Kirsten has been a professor at Tulane, Harvard, and now the University of Arizona, where she is the Associate Dean of the Environmental Law Program. Kirsten was first elected to the Arizona State Senate in 2020. Before that, she was elected to the Arizona House in 2016 and 2018. And today, she's fighting for reproductive choice, protecting our environment, building a just economy, expanding access to healthcare, and my favorite, strengthening Social Security and Medicare. Kirsten, the floor is yours.
This midterm election in November is the most important election in our lifetimes. And this is not an exaggeration. Democracy is on the ballot. A woman's right to choose is on the ballot. The future of the planet is on the ballot. And quite frankly, whether we can protect democracy, a woman's right to choose, and the planet could all come down to who wins this congressional seat. As you know, as a result of redistricting, this is now Congressional District 6, Ann Kirkpatrick's seat, which the lines have changed as a result of redistricting. This is now the most competitive district in the state and one of the top in the nation. And if you want to get down to details, how competitive is it? Well, under the new lines that we have now, Biden won this district by just 400 votes. Yeah, 400. And yet it is a must-hold seat for the Democrats, who hold only a razor-thin majority in the U.S. Congress. And we just can't afford to lose a single seat in the U.S. House. So quite literally, whether the Democrats are able to hold the U.S. House could come down to who wins this seat. Or you could think of it this way. If one of my Republican opponents wins the seat, we're very likely to have Kevin McCarthy as a Speaker of the House. The House will very likely disband the January 6th Commission, legitimizing insurrection as political discourse, allow state legislatures to decide election outcomes, and who knows, ban abortion altogether. But if I win this election and help the Democrats to hold the House can continue to push for the protection of voting rights being undercut in states like Arizona right now, work to guarantee abortion rights being taken away by our Supreme Court, tackle our water and climate crisis with the urgency that they both deserve, and continue to help working families by bringing down the cost of childcare, elder care, and prescription drugs. So the question before you is, am I the best candidate from the Democrats to make sure that we hold this seat and, most importantly, our majority in Congress? I'm a woman, a teacher, an environmental attorney elected 3 times to the Arizona legislature from a district that overlaps with a good chunk of this congressional district. I fought in Phoenix for my constituents with a track record of getting things done without sacrificing our democratic values. I have both deep and very wide support in this primary campaign, a field campaign that is already hard at work, knocking on doors and contacting voters. And I myself am out talking to voters about what really matters to them, from protecting our right to vote, to controlling our own healthcare decisions over our own bodies, to addressing our climate-driven water crisis, to affording the next tank of gas. So I want to talk about each of these issues in a little bit more detail, starting with voting. I will fight to protect every Arizonan's right to vote and have your vote counted. Voters must continue to decide elections and not politicians. And this means that voting should be easy and accessible. When I was in the legislature, I fought against partisan and frankly racist attempts to silence Arizonans' voices at the ballot box, and I will continue this fight in Congress. Abortion rights. As a woman and as a mom of a teenage daughter, I am truly outraged that the Supreme Court would rule that women do not control their own bodies. Now, Supreme Court has not ruled this yet, but it is looking very likely. And this will set my daughter's generation back. And frankly, it is a slap in the face to all women, all persons who are capable of bearing a child. The decision to have an abortion is deeply personal, as is the decision to have a child. And it's one that I trust people to make for themselves. I don't trust politicians and state government to make that decision for you. And we simply can't leave it to politicians to make our healthcare decisions in general. Full stop. In Arizona, it is quite possible that if the Supreme Court does overturn Roe, a law that could go into effect that criminalizes abortion altogether or bans abortion at 15 weeks with no exception for rape or incest. So when I'm elected to Congress, I will fight to guarantee the right to abortion in legislation. That will be one of our most powerful options that we will have. And as an attorney, I want to go a little bit further and say that I know this issue is not just about abortion. And that's why, one of the reasons for why we need to stop the Republicans in their tracks right away. The court's route to attacking abortion is attacking the constitutional right to privacy. And the right to privacy is the basis of so many rights that we rely on and celebrate. The right to use contraceptives, the right to marry who we love, the right to bring up children as we see fit. Water security. Arizona has a very difficult road ahead without a sustainable water supply. And I'm prepared to tackle the water and climate crisis that threatens Arizona's future. I've devoted my professional career to these issues, and they are a top priority. They were a top priority of mine in the legislature when I was there. And I worked across the aisle to get conservation funding in the Colorado Drought Contingency Plan, and a plan that, while woefully insufficient, as we see, tried to ensure a steady supply of water to all users. But no matter who you talk to, and I have talked to a lot of people, from farmers in Pinal County to just this past weekend, ranchers in Cochise County, to small business owners, to city dwellers like myself, no one is immune to the calamity of water scarcity. And yet there are low-cost, smart solutions just staring us in the face. I introduced many of these bills in the Arizona legislature. We should be conserving our water, reusing our water, protecting it from contamination from toxic chemicals like those forever chemicals that are polluting Tucson and Marana's groundwater. We should be using drip irrigation on our farms. That's what they do in Israel. They have an arid environment. And looking for ways to maximize clean energy, like shading our crops and irrigation canals with solar panels. And speaking of solar panels, with over 350 days of sunshine here in Arizona, that is the solution to our climate crisis. Arizona should be the Persian Gulf of solar. It'll help reduce heat, drought, wildfire, save people's money on their utility bills, and create good quality jobs. Inflation. Inflation and the high cost of gas is hitting many families very hard. And there are things that we can do right now to give families relief, especially those like seniors on fixed incomes for whom inflation is hitting the hardest. One of them is to bring down the cost of prescription drugs by enabling Medicare to negotiate the price, just as the Veterans Administration does for drugs. But Republicans have refused and continue to refuse to negotiate to get this done to protect our seniors. I do think that we can get this done in Congress. The bottom line is that Republicans are going to give it all they've got to flip this seat red, but we're not going to let them. Southern Arizona has a tradition of electing strong women leaders, from Gabby Giffords to Ann Kirkpatrick, and I would be proud to carry on that tradition and use my experience as an environmental attorney, a legislator, and as a mom to fight for Arizonans and their families. I'm proud to have received the endorsement of Ann Kirkpatrick's PAC, known as Moms Fed Up. I'm often a very fed up mom in the state. Also the endorsement of Congressman Grijalva, former Congressman Ron Barber, Mayor Romero, and former Mayor Jonathan Rothschild. I'm supported by Emily's List, the League of Conservation Voters, and several of the largest unions in our state, from the UFCW to the communication workers to the Southwest Carpenters. I've run 3 times in this very same congressional district, and I've never lost a race, and I don't intend to start now. So thank you so much for listening to me, and I look forward to your questions.
Thanks very much, Kirsten. I think I speak for all of us when I say that we all admire your courage, intelligence, and tenacity. And with that, let's open the floor for questions. Let me get the ball rolling by just asking you, Kirsten, what do we need to do to protect reproductive rights? Do you think that we should codify Roe v. Wade, or is there no hope?
I do think so. And I think that's one of the important issues that congressional race is so critical. I am a pro-choice candidate and ready to work on that as soon as I am elected. And we know that the leading Republican candidate in this race is anti-abortion and would work against that. I think that the right to an abortion is a fundamental right. It needs to be guaranteed in something that applies nationally so that we don't have this checkerboard of states where women's rights are curtailed so that they're having to drive hundreds of miles in order to get this basic healthcare service. And yet it's available to women in other states, such as Nevada or California. That's not right. That's creating an unequal and unfair population. I do feel that guaranteeing this through legislation is going to be very important.
Thank you for that. Let's turn now to Michael Bryan, a member of our board. Go ahead, Michael, with your question.
Actually, this also relates to one of the questions in chat. Gail Camaras asked, which Republican candidate concerns you most and why? Let me suggest that it's clearly Juan Ciscomani, who has raised over $1 million in this race thus far. He was just profiled in the New York Times this last Sunday. He says in that interview that he's going to be focusing like a laser on 2 issues, inflation and immigration. I'd like to hear you talk about that a little bit, Kirsten.
Well, thank you, Michael. It does seem like Mr. Ciscomani is at the top of the heap on the Republican side. And yet he comes to this race with all of the baggage of the Ducey administration. You know, his government experiences as an aide to the governor. He has never held elective office. He's never been directly accountable to the people. And he has to live with the atrocious way in which the Ducey administration handled the pandemic. We are one of the top states in terms of deaths per capita in the pandemic. He has to deal with the record of the Ducey administration on education, considering a top issue to Arizona voters. And yet we continue to rank between 48th, 49th, or 50th in terms of per student spending, with terrible teacher shortages. So the list goes on and on. There was actually just a report that came out about the mishandling of federal funds by the Ducey administration. Where'd that money go to? Good question. What was Juan Ciscomani doing when that money was not being properly spent and somehow taxpayer money disappeared? These issues are ones that we do need to address. Inflation is hurting families. The high cost of gas is cutting into people's budgets. Women, people of color, seniors on fixed incomes have been hit particularly hard. And I do think that there are things that we can do as the economy, the supply chain gets back on track, which is what we really need to make big progress in bringing down inflation. But in the meantime, we should think about suspending the gas tax for a temporary time period. We should be looking at price gouging by the gas industry. I mean, the oil industry continues to make record profits out there. I actually introduced a bill to give our state attorney general authority to deal with price gouging. We're seeing that in, even, with everyday household goods, and the Republicans blocked it. So that's something that we need to do. And as I said, let's look at some of these issues that are taking up a lot of people's take-home pay, such as the cost of prescription drugs. Americans spend up to 3 times what people pay in other countries for this. And a large fraction of Americans take prescription drugs. So this is something very concrete that we can do to help people at their pocketbooks.
And on the issue of immigration?
And on the issue of immigration, there's no question that, Washington has failed us on the border and on immigration. We do need to have a secure border. We do need to deal with the criminal element of drug trafficking and human smuggling. But the answer is not 13th century walls, and it's not photo ops at the border. And that's what we're getting out from the Republicans right now. It is help for the communities at the border. It is smarter policing at the border with technology and manpower. And it is a real recognition of the humanitarian crisis at the border. And that means fixing our broken immigration system, from having an asylum system that works, being true to our own law and international law, and also having a pathway to citizenship for the 11 million immigrants right now in this country that do not have legal status, including our dreamers, young people who have lived their entire lives in our country and yet must often live in the shadows rather than contributing to our economy and to bringing up their families and contributing to our communities.
Just a brief follow-up, if I may. One of the main Republican talking points right now is that the out-of-control spending in Washington during the Biden administration is responsible for the inflation that we're feeling right now. Do you have a response to that particular allegation?
Well, having been a legislator during this pandemic and seeing what so many families were going through, and working in particular on the issue of the eviction crisis, I have to push back on that. For so many people, those unemployment checks, those rental payments, those paycheck protection programs. I've gotten quite close to a business owner here who was able to get one of those paycheck protection loans that was a forgivable loan, and that kept him in business. And it's these payments kept so many families in business. So they were necessary programs, and the economy has come back a lot quicker than I think people thought it would. And yet we still have, right now, we even are looking at some rise in COVID. So people are not altogether back in the workplace. And yet the economy at the same time is trying to rev up. So those things happen, and we need to address them as much as we can. But to blame the payments to especially low-income folks, that's not the problem.
We have a question from Ron Cohen. Ron, go right ahead.
One of the things you didn't mention, Kirsten, is about gun control. How are you going to handle it, and with whom?
Once again, I think that this is something where we need to work in Congress on getting across the board common sense gun violence protection prevention measures, expanding the background checks, and closing those gun show loopholes, the boyfriend loophole. These are measures that a vast majority of Americans do support, as well as taking a hard look at assault weapons. Incredible to me that an 18-year-old can walk into any gun store and without any kind of gun safety training or any kind of screening, buy a weapon of mass destruction. And this is the same individual that we don't trust to be able to drink, and yet they can buy an assault weapon that Marines would take weeks to learn how to handle. We also, I think, have a problem in Arizona in particular with this rise of xenophobic, racist rhetoric. And I think that is something that here in Arizona we need to crack down on. And I mean, we have legislators, state senators like Wendy Rogers making really atrocious comments that are just sort of feeding the flames of this. And it's now being accepted as things that people can say, are expected to say, even in our politics. And that just should not continue. That is something in particular I think Arizonans can require of their legislative officials to stop that. But otherwise, this is clearly a national epidemic. It's not just Arizona, and we need to address it that way. And I'm cautiously optimistic we might see something in Congress in the next short time period.
We have a question from Susie Anderson, also on our board. Go ahead, Susie.
Thank you, Kirsten. It's so good to see you. My question is regarding an article about how women got abortions before Roe v. Wade by going to a psychiatrist. If they said the right words, like, if I have this child, I will kill myself, they could say it's a mental health issue and they would be allowed to get their abortions. Do you have any suggestions for how we handle that?
Susie, that's quite interesting. I have not read that article. I will definitely do so. It sounds to me what is in play here is the fact that there are exceptions in these abortion bans to save the life of the mother. And it sounds like there had been a practice of a woman coming in and saying, you got to save my life because I will otherwise kill myself. My only reaction is that is not a solution. As you've said, we don't have psychiatrists that who would even know to do that. I mean, that is certainly not the answer, and I'm not sure that even that would survive in many of the states. So I think that what we need is we are going to have to guarantee abortion rights in legislation if we lose it. In addition to, whatever, if there's some court challenges as well, based on Equal Rights Amendment or based on 14th Amendment. There could be some other legal handles that still have not been exhausted, despite what we might see from the Supreme Court.
Got a question from Andrea Kennedy. Andrea, go right ahead.
When you went about, especially Cochise and Yuma, what were you hearing as concerns? What is your campaign doing to make sure that people who are independents, what steps are you taking so people will know who you are? And how are you planning to drown out this drumbeat of, we're the ones responsible for inflation and the border is just hemorrhaging criminals?
Well, first of all, what I'm hearing is people are really concerned about water. I'm hearing a lot about that. I spoke to the Cochise Graham Cattle Growers Association on Saturday, and they were all a Twitter about water issues. They're dealing with record drops in groundwater. They're dealing with out-of-state corporations that have come in, and because there's absolutely no regulation of groundwater pumping outside our active management areas, there's proposals for citizen proposals to create an active management area or a rural management area to start getting a handle on this, to find out where is the water going, how much is there, what are we using it for, what could we be using it for. So there is a surprise. It can be a very arcane subject, and yet it is something that people are really concerned about. As well, they need to. We have, cracking roads in near the Wilcox area where people would have to drive 50 miles out of their way because of road problems. And, small businesses, homeowners, the water table is dropping so much that they have to leave their homes or put in a significant investment in order to drill a deeper well to get to the water. So here's an issue where, we do need, again, Congress can help. In 1980, Arizona passed the one law it has on groundwater management, the 1980 Groundwater Management Act. And that was because Congress said, we're not going to help you get that Colorado River water unless you protect your groundwater. There's also a lot of money and authority that the USDA has with respect to farming. And I believe that there's a lot of resources that we can bring to the rural areas on things like water, especially, transitioning to more drip irrigation, using our water much more wisely. So there's many things that we can do. And to be frank, that's one issue on which I think I, as a Democrat, really can reach out to those independents. And even, I'm hoping, some moderate Republicans. Those ranchers all sat and listened as I ticked off the ways in which, working with our universities, working with the USDA, a lot of things that we can be doing with respect to our rangelands and our agricultural areas. So getting out there, I think there's no substitute for getting out and talking to people. You can blast them on the TV, you can blast them on the radio, but you got to get out there and you got to attend their meetings. You got to show up. You got to knock on their doors. And I think that's the most effective thing that we can do. And of course, we're going to be doing everything, but that is one thing that we're doing. And if you all know of places I should be showing up, please let me know. Send an email to engelforarizona@gmail.com. We'll try to make it.
I want to say you came to the right place because you're a Democrats of Greater Tucson. Let's turn to Lillian Fox.
My question is, how are you going to talk about abortion immigration in terms that will persuade independents whose votes you need that it's really right to vote for you and not some idiot Republican who's spreading fear?
Well, Lillian, that is a great question. And I think you nailed it. That is an important question. It is amazing that abortion, as it has been interpreted by the courts, we now have this kind of the states cannot impose an undue burden upon a woman's right to have an abortion. That is supported by a large majority of the population, including independents. So just the abortion issue itself is not necessarily something that is just a Democratic issue by any means. But further than that, what we did see in the pandemic was, even from the far right, was this, I have control over my own body and healthcare decisions and whether or not I want to get a vaccine or not. And I don't agree with that. But there is an aspect of, personal autonomy over our own healthcare decisions that, quite frankly, I actually think the abortion issue touches into. Now, I certainly, support being able, it's different in that, it's important to make sure that people don't spread their infection to other people. But nevertheless, we have seen how much people feel that this is something that decisions they make about their own healthcare, it's made with their family, with their partners, with their minister, these are very personal decisions. And so I think there's some room here to say, look, governments stay out. This is an issue of personal liberty.
I see that there's a lot of questions in the chat, so we're going to turn to Joe Danishevsky, a member of our board.
The first question we have is, what are your views on Arizona gun laws? And there's another comment or two about it would be wise to say gun safety laws as opposed to using gun control laws.
I think Arizona generally gets a fairly low grade in terms of gun safety. We do not have strong laws in terms of requiring that guns be properly locked. We have constant pressure in the legislature to allow people to bring loaded weapons onto places like school grounds. That was an issue I dealt with. And to be frank, this is very personal. I'm one of those parents, maybe many of you as well, who's received one of those calls from their child, hiding under a desk, scared out of their wits because there is a report of an armed gun person somebody with a gun outside their school. And, thank goodness in my situation, nothing harmful came to pass. But my understanding is that we do have the gun show loophole. We do have the boyfriend loophole so that an order of protection would not apply to somebody who's not the married partner of somebody who is feeling threatened in a domestic violence situation. So some of the known measures for gun safety, we do not have here in Arizona.
Okay, what steps will you take to promote protections from extreme heat for outdoor workers?
That is also a important issue here in Arizona. It is a worker safety issue, and I know persons such as Barbara Warren with Physicians for Social Responsibility has worked on this and opened up a dialogue with many of our labor unions. And it seems to me on the federal side, this is something where I would hope that the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, which is responsible for worker safety, would come up with those guidelines for businesses. And they are things such as, maximum time that workers can be out in the heat, putting in breaks where they can cool off, making sure that they've got the proper clothing. I think that businesses can pool together, maybe with, a cooling room, just like our city of Tucson has used things like our schools to be cooling centers. If people, do not have air conditioning or their air conditioning goes off, there's a safe place that you can go. I think that there's definitely ways that we can protect our workers and make this so that it is not overly burdensome for our businesses. And it's a reality as we're seeing more and more days of extreme heat. And our economy just can't afford to just shut down when it's really hot, because increasingly that's more and more days of the year. So this is an economic issue that I think that we can get, that we can and that we need to get the cooperation and collaboration with business partners.
New issue. How can we avoid another attempt at a national insurrection during the 2024 election?
I know that Congress has been considering legislation to address some of these extremist groups. Actually, I think we already have legislation on the books, so hasn't been always quite clear to me whether this is a matter of new authority that is needed or a better use of existing authority to deal with some of these, these white supremacist and groups and insurrectionists as domestic terrorists or potential plotting to overthrow our government. This is very serious, and it really is one of the biggest challenges to our democracy. So I do support more efforts to find these organizations and bring their persons to justice, and to get rid of these platforms that seem to allow these people to traffic in these truly dangerous, violent ideas, violent actions based on things like replacement theory and things like that. We do need more action on that.
We have a question from Craig Markin.
With this idea of gun safety, how would it be to put a tax on the ammunition, such as it would cost $500 to load a 100-round clip?
I'm not an expert in that particular option, but I'd like to know more about it. Some of these other issues we're having trouble getting, I don't know if that one has got a better prospect of success.
Joe, why don't you see if there's more questions in the chat and go ahead and ask those questions.
Everyone is focused on abortion if Roe is overturned. What about the many other rights that are part of Roe that will go down as well?
And that is a point that I have been making. I recently published an op-ed in the Arizona Daily Star making exactly that point, that this is not an isolated instance. This is part of a concerted attack by the Republicans on privacy rights, and those privacy rights undergird many other rights that we take for granted, and many that our LGBTQ community depends upon. So this is why we have to stop this in its tracks. Okay, well, if people have more questions, please let me know. We do have a website, engelforarizona.com, and Gmail that I check, as well as my campaign staff, engelforarizona@gmail.com. And if you're looking for getting involved in a campaign, we certainly could use your help. I know it's hot out there. We would love to have you knocking on doors with us in the heat, and we'll give you water. But if you're not up for that, we can find other things for you to do as well that are not out in the 100-degree heat. So thank you very much for having me today. Feel free to follow up with any questions that we didn't get to. Look forward to seeing you out throughout this election season.
Kirsten, thank you very much for wrapping up our program. You've been quite a dynamic speaker. We've had some great questions. I'm going to bring the meeting to a close. And with that, folks, I'm going to have to say goodbye, and we will see you at the next meeting. Thanks again, Kirsten.
Thank you very much.